How to draw a hyper-realistic woven fabric pattern, like you see on a sweater. Welcome back. If you're new to my channel, I'm a 22-year-old charcoal and graphite artist that specializes in hyperrealism with a little bit of surrealism. Basically, I like to make things look like photographs, but at the same time, they can't realistically be photographs. I'm sharing literally everything I know about drawing with you guys, so if you want to learn how to draw like this, consider subscribing. I think by far the most requested tutorial you guys have been commenting under my videos is how to draw fabric, specifically the texture on a sweater. It's a really complex texture that has a lot of woven pieces going in and out. It's highly repetitive, but also pretty hard to do right, unless you just follow this tutorial. I'm gonna break it down for you step by step so that you can achieve that super detailed, hyper-realistic sweater texture in the easiest and quickest way possible. But first, you need to know what tools you're using. So let's quickly go over every single tool that I use whenever I draw, and then we'll get into the tutorial. Ready? Let's begin. For graphite, we just want typical graphite pencils. I use the Faber-Castell 9000 series. You'll want 3 of them to make it easy: a light, medium, and dark. I like to use 2H as my light, HB as my mid, and 2B as my dark. Any tone lighter than 2H is unnecessary, and anything darker than 2B should be used with charcoal. For charcoal, we just want some sort of pencil. I use the General's pencil, preferably the soft variation. It applies much easier and is the darkest type in my opinion. You also need a charcoal stick with sandpaper. With this, you'll make charcoal powder by filing down the stick onto a piece of paper. This is one of, if not the most important tools. Starting off for our erasers, the Tombow Mono Eraser is used for more prominent highlights with sharper edges, hence the minute tip. The Faber-Castell Perfection 7056 is used for more subtle highlights with softer edges, mainly tone and value based. An electric eraser is used for the strongest of highlights. By pressing the button, the tip spins at a speed that allows almost anything to be erased. It's a tool that I recommend to anyone, and one that once you have it, you don't really know what you do without it. The kneaded eraser can be shaped to your liking and is great for more abstract, unpredictable highlighted textures. Finally, the Faber-Castell dust-free eraser is used to clean up any smeared charcoal. It's not required, but incredibly convenient, and I highly recommend. As you can see, erasers are vital to the detailing process, which is why we have the most tools in this category. Any sort of makeup or art brush will be used for most of the blending. I personally use the IPC1 by Dynasty brushes. I recommend you use some sort of makeup brush since they blend the smoothest from my experience. We'll use a blending tortillon for blending the smaller graphite details. Lastly, a soft tissue, preferably Kleenex, is best when trying to achieve a very smooth, uniform tone. These 3 tools will be able to blend anything we'll ever need. Looking at our miscellaneous items, the Faber-Castell Polychromos color pencil is fantastic at achieving the same dark tones of charcoal in small, hard-to-reach areas where charcoal cannot get. A white gel pen can be used at the end to strengthen and make the brightest highlights shine even more. However, it's not necessary. I personally like the Jelly Roll pens. Lastly, any stiff brush is great for wiping away all those shavings that get in the way. Again, not necessary, but very convenient. For my sharpeners, I use the KUM Magnesium Sharpener for my graphite pencils and the General's All Art for my charcoal pencils. The brand doesn't really matter though. What matters is that you have separate sharpeners for your graphite and charcoal pencils because they actually sharpen differently. For my paper, I use the Strathmore 500 series plate or smooth 3-ply. Because of how expensive it is, if you want to use the 400 or even the 300 series, you can. The most important thing is that you use Bristol paper that is smooth, not vellum. Vellum does not allow you to achieve the smallest of details like smooth can due to the vellum's tooth. Now that we've gone over every single tool that I use, let's begin. Okay, as you can see, we have a 3" by 3" grid here, and if you want to know how I make my grid, I did make a tutorial on that. I will put it up here somewhere. And we're working with a smaller grid on this tutorial because we're working with a pattern here. I'm not drawing a full mouth, I'm not drawing lips, eyes, etc. I'm just drawing a pattern that has the same steps and technique this big as it does this big. Hence why I also don't have a sketch anywhere. Now, if you've seen any of my videos, you know that we start with the base. Now, the steps are going to be a little different for this tutorial, but we always have to start with the base. So I'm going to grab my brush, I'm going to dip it in charcoal powder, and then we're going to apply a thin, uniform layer of charcoal powder. However, I recommend you mark your grid before you do this. I grab my electric eraser, and I'm going to just mark the intersecting points of my grid. Now what that does is whenever we go over it with the charcoal powder, we'll still be able to see those dots. And if we don't do that, we're gonna lose our grid to the charcoal powder, and we really need that to get the proportions and the angles correct. So make sure you mark that first and then proceed with the charcoal powder. I'm just giving a smooth circular pattern. Going up and down will cause really bad streaks and can also damage the paper, so I highly recommend going in a circular fashion. Now this serves as the base, or basically the tone that is between the lightest tone in the reference and the darkest tone in the reference. I like to make mine pretty dark. How dark you go with your charcoal powder is up to you, but from my experience, it's much easier to take away when need be than to add on. So don't be afraid to layer it on there. Now, if your reference has wrinkles in the fabric, that is going to change this step. The top of a wrinkle is going to be much lighter, and then kind of in the valley of the wrinkle will be much darker. So take that into account that this varies per reference. You can see my reference is just flat. I'm just showing you how to do the texture on top. So while the step does seem pretty easy and mindless, it very much varies in difficulty based on the reference. You can barely see them, but those grid marks that we marked are right there. You can see it's a little splotchy, it's not perfectly uniform. That's okay. There's so much detail in this pattern and texture that a little bit of spottiness on the base will not really show at all in the final product. Okay, there we have the base. I'm going to remark our grid intersecting points just so I can see them a little better. Perfect. Now, if you watched any of my tutorials, you know that step 2 is usually the shadows. However, we're gonna switch 2 and 3 up. It's now time to do the highlights. So now we're going to mark each strand of the cloth. Now, the good thing is this is a pattern that moves around a lot and doesn't always have to be perfectly straight. I know in my reference, the lines are perfectly straight, but they don't have to be, so don't worry too much about that if you don't have to. But I'm going to start around the intersecting points just so that I have something to go off of. But basically, we're going to, almost like we're drawing with this pencil, we're going to mark on the grid where the strand is, and in kind of a sketchy fashion, making sure to leave a little gaps in between. You don't want to just fully color them in. Again, I'm going to mark that edge so I kind of know where I got to get down to. You see I'm leaving tiny little lines to show that they are separated. There we go, there's one strand. You can see by doing that sketching method where I'm kind of just moving really fast all over the place, it creates these imperfect and unique little groups that run up along. And it's not a perfect straight line, but it's good enough. And it was all done with the mono. And we chose the mono because it is better for sharper edges. It's more precise than the perfection. And now we're going to just do that above and below until we fill out the whole thing. Now, if you want to be 100% accurate, the line that we just made, the groups go at that angle. You can see all the little lines that I left in between go like this. Now, the one below it, the line that we're gonna make below it now, we want the lines to go like this to show kind of that weaving pattern. Rule of thumb, you don't want to go right directly underneath. You wanna go directly underneath and a little bit up or a little bit down. Here, we wanna go a little bit up because that's the way everything's going. So we're gonna go a little bit up and do kind of just the same thing. You wanna leave a pretty good gap in between. You don't want the gap to be the same width as these. You want them to be a little closer, but enough that we can get in there for the shadows. We're just going to keep on going. Now we're back to the first one. And at this point, I'm not even looking at my reference. Like I said, this is a pattern, so once you kind of get it going, you kind of know what it's gonna look like. Now, once you have a couple rows down, you can start almost connecting some of the tips. So you can see this one comes down like this one comes like that. They kind of make a V. To make the shadow process a little easier, just try to just almost connect them. And try to connect the two. And we're just gonna keep doing that. So I'm going to do them in pairs. I'm going to go 1, 1, barely connect them, 1, 1, barely connect them, and keep going until we fill the whole thing out. So make sure in the process, these tips to the mono get really dull really quickly. So once you do like 3 to 4 rows, make sure to grab scissors and just snip the tips so that you get a nice sharp edge again. You want to connect the V's in every single row, not just in pairs. I'm sorry if I worded that weirdly, but I like to draw them in V's, so one row, and then connect them, but make sure then you connect that row to the next one as well. They all want to be connected in kind of that V tip area so that you have these little pockets here of shadows that we can fill in later. It's kind of hard to explain in words the way that I'm applying this with the mono. It's more of a like controlled scribble. I'm not just pressing down and rubbing back and forth. I'm pulling up. Sometimes it's just downstrokes, sometimes it's both. But I'm really trying to create those little lines, the imperfections in each group to add to that randomness of the material. I know this is super tedious, but I promise this is the worst step. Don't try to worry about connecting every single one of these V's. Honestly, you can see I'm just running up and down, randomly connecting ones here and there. You want to try to connect most of them, or at least put some sort of highlight in there. But this is one of those textures that's so detailed and tedious that you can mess up and forget stuff over and over and over again. And when you zoom out and just look at the final product, you're never going to notice. And honestly, these are my favorite types of textures. Mostly just a time factor. It's really not a skill factor. You can see I'm really not putting too much into this. And there we go. Hardest part is out of the way. Honestly, I had a blast doing that, and I feel like once you get the hang of kind of the whole sketching technique, it becomes really fun. Now, honestly, I know a lot of people that just stop right there because it doesn't look bad. So if you really want, you can just end it right there and it looks good enough for sure. But I do think what we just made needs to be reinforced with some darker tones. So let's move on. Okay, so step 3 is the shadows. We're going to just be filling in the blacks in between some of these V's. And we're mainly going to be using the just General's charcoal pencil and then the polychromos. We're just going to go in between these areas that we kind of left and just start filling them in. Now you want to make sure you don't fill in every single gap in between. Some gaps are bigger than others, some are completely closed. Filling in every single one will look really robotic. So I'm just adding a little dot here and there, some bigger than others, just kind of following what I made in the last step. Very unorganized, just moving all over the place. Make sure to make some bigger than others. Some of them, even like this one right here, you can go in that V pattern, kind of follow it the whole way up. Try to avoid going in between the groups. Try to stick with just the gaps between the V's. We'll switch over to the polychromos for those more precise negative spaces. Okay, now we're going to take the polychromos color pencil and go in between the groups that we made and all the negative space that doesn't have a shadow currently. However, we're not going to do every single one like I said, but try to fill in anywhere that you still see the base. Remember to make some more subtle than others. Make sure you have a sharp tip for this too. I highly recommend not connecting two dots that we made. So like going from here and making a black line up to this one. We're just extending the charcoal spots we just made. This has got to be by far the most subtle step we've done so far. You really don't want to overdo this, because it very quickly starts taking away from what we've done. This is a judgment call. When you think you're done, you can be done. Okay, now we're on to the reinforce stage. Basically, the stage is taking what we've done and maybe going back to a part or adding a little bit here and there to help these shadows and the highlights complement each other a little better. So here you can see that we do have some highlighted areas. We have all the blacks in place. We do, however, have a little bit of midtones kind of popping through from that base that we made, kind of all over between the highlights and the shadows. So I'm just going to grab a brush and I'm going to just randomly in certain areas that I see a lot of base, just very so slightly blend a little bit of that black to help create a little bit of like a raised look, if that makes any sense. I am going to add a little bit of charcoal onto the tip of the brush. Again, this is a judgment call, but I'm adding charcoal to the tip and I'm just tapping some of the black spots to help make those lower areas, kind of the valleys, a little darker and look like they're sunken in more. And then as reinforced states, we're going to go back in and complement what we just did with some more highlights. So grab that mono again and add a little more highlighted line work, some more texture to the raised areas. Good enough. Now finally for the touch-ups. To touch up the shadows, we can use a darker toned graphite pencil. I'm using a 2B, and this isn't a necessary step. Again, you can do this as much as you want, as little as you want, but I'm going to go in, just draw some lines in between some of the highlighted groups to make some of them stand out a little more. Just one line at a time, going in between any of the cracks that I made with the mono eraser. This is one of those steps that honestly, from how far back the camera is, I don't know if you can even see what I'm doing, but it's something that adds more the closer you get. Again, if the fabric on your drawing is just a small portion of someone's shirt that is pretty zoomed out, you can just skip this step. These finishing touches steps are for the people that are drawing fabric this large on a grander scale and really can't afford to lose any detailing whatsoever. I think that's good enough. Next, to touch up and add some of those final highlights, we're going to be using the electric eraser. Now, on my other tutorials, sometimes for this step, we will be using the white gel pen. However, for something like this, there aren't really any highlights that are as bright as the white of the paper. If there were, if something was glistening, maybe if this fabric was wet, we would be using the white gel pen. But for now, we're going to go one step down, which is the electric eraser. So make sure you have a sharp tip. And we're just gonna go in and add some high points to the groups to make them look even more three-dimensional. Again, don't do this to every single one because then it'll look really bad. Just here and there. You can add a little dot, you can add a full line. It's really up to you. I'm gonna do both here and there. There we go. You can see that helped raise a little bit, give it a little more dimension. I always say the higher contrast, the better it looks. The biggest constraint, the hardest part is time. It's very tedious. When it comes to drawing, people always think that tedious equals hard, but that's really not the case at all. This was super simple. I didn't do too much thinking at all during this whole process, but the outcome looks amazing, especially the farther away you are. It really looks like a woven fabric texture from a sweater. There you have it, how to draw hyper-realistic sweater fabric texture. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Let me know down in the comments what you want to see next. If you want to see daily content from me, head over to my Instagram and my TikTok. I try to post every single day. And I actually just finished a new original drawing. It's right here behind me, and I now have limited edition prints on my website. I only made 22 of them. Once they're gone for good. They're the exact size, they're 1-to-1, an archival, high-quality paper that honestly will probably outlast you. They're hand-numbered and hand-signed. They come with a certificate of authenticity, and there's free shipping within the US. So if you're interested in owning a piece of my artwork, head over to my shop before they're gone. Also, if you want to receive these videos 1 week early, and also get one-on-one feedback from me for your artwork, head over to my Patreon. If you enjoy these tutorials and want more high-quality videos and to just support me in the best way possible, please consider subscribing. It means the world to me. So yeah, appreciate you being here, and hopefully we see you soon.